The chill that ran down my spine, an icy premonition of complete and utter ruin, had absolutely nothing to do with the crisp, late October air, but everything to do with the fact that my wife, Sarah, had inexplicably left her phone a cracked and spiderwebbed relic clinging precariously to life by a single bar of battery, resting innocently upon the kitchen counter, an unwitting silent harbinger of the devastation to come. When I, out of a simple habitual act of domesticity and care, picked it up with the intention of plugging it into its charger, a notification, sharp and unwelcome, materialized on the fractured screen, not from a friend or a family member, but from a number I had never seen before. Yet the name displayed above it, scrawled into the very fabric of my brain in letters of blazing fire, was undeniably Brenda. This Brenda, the supposed work nemesis Sarah had often and dramatically complained about. The source of her exaggerated exasperation and my sympathetic head nods now felt like a cruel, elaborate prank, the punchline delivered with the force of a brutal fist directly to my unsuspecting gut, because the stark, chilling reality of the text message itself, so precise and casual in its damning command, read, "Bring cash tonight. I'm at the usual room 7. My hands, once steady and capable, began to tremble uncontrollably, a visible manifestation of the sudden, profound shock rippling through my entire being, as I tried desperately to reconcile the woman I had loved devotedly for 15 years, the seemingly perfect mother of my 2 cherished children, with the sinister transactional implication of that single damning message. A question hanging heavy in the air. Could this truly be happening? The phone, now a searing brand in my grip, slipped from my numb fingers, clattering with a sickening finality to the polished hardwood floor. Certainty of room 7 inches and cash as the horrifying coordinates of my impending heartbreak. My mind, a whirlwind of disbelief and dawning horror, spun wildly, frantically attempting to grasp at any plausible innocent explanation, because the casual authority and unsettling precision of the text, its cold, undeniable command, reeked unmistakably of something far more insidious. Something deeply, terrifyingly real. Panic, an unwelcome and suffocating presence, tightened its icy grip around my chest, suffocating any logical thought, as my first visceral instinct screamed at me to immediately confront her, to unleash a torrent of accusations, to demand answers with a furious, unyielding intensity that would match the inferno raging within me. But a deeper, colder, more calculating part of my mind, the part that had, in recent weeks, begun to subtly register the increasing frequency of her late nights, the sudden, almost defensive guarding of her phone, the vague, unsatisfactory excuses for her increasingly erratic schedule, whispered with chilling clarity, "No, not yet, for you must first understand the true extent of what you are up against before you strike." And so, with a heart thudding against my ribs like a desperate drum, I stooped to retrieve the phone from the floor, not with the intention of calling her, but with the grim determination to record, to gather incontrovertible proof, even as my hands, betraying my internal turmoil, shook so violently that I almost dropped the wretched device once more. Knowing with absolute certainty that I had to witness this unfolding horror with my own eyes, had to understand the true nature of room 7 and the usual that now burned behind my eyelids, a sickening, persistent torment, because this, I realized with a fresh wave of nausea, wasn't just about infidelity, but about something far more seedy, something undeniably transactional, something that felt like an irreversible descent into a murky, contemptible world I had never in my wildest nightmares imagined my wife, my Sarah, inhabiting. I waited, each agonizing minute stretching into an eternity, the relentless tick of the kitchen clock echoing like a series of hammer blows against the fragile composure I desperately clung to, a fragile dam against the rising tide of my despair, until, finally, Sarah arrived home much later than usual, her demeanor strikingly cheerful, utterly oblivious to the cataclysmic shift that had just occurred in our lives, or perhaps a terrifyingly skilled actress, capable of maintaining the most convincing of charades. She greeted me with a light kiss, her lips brushing my cheek, and asked about my day with a voice that was unsettlingly light, each word a finely sharpened dagger twisting deeper into my already wounded heart. Forcing a smile, a grotesque contortion, of my features, I played the part of the doting, unsuspecting husband, maintaining the illusion of ignorance with an almost superhuman effort, though the charade itself was excruciating. Every fiber of my being screaming with an unbearable urgency to expose the elaborate lie, to tear down the facade that now suffocated us. But I held it all back, a silent, predatory force, biding its time, waiting with a cold, terrifying patience for the perfect, most devastating moment to strike, around 9 o'clock. A time that would forever be seared into my memory, Sarah, with a casualness that now felt like a calculated performance, announced her intention to step out for a quick errand, a phrase that caused my stomach to clench in a sudden, sickening knot, because I knew, with an agonizing certainty, that this was it. This was the moment of revelation. As she grabbed her purse, a small, nondescript clutch she rarely carried, I couldn't help but notice the telltale bulge within its cheap fabric, an undeniable confirmation of my deepest fears. It was cash. My long-held suspicion now solidified by this irrefutable visual evidence, hardened into a cold, terrifying certainty that made the blood drain from my face, leaving me feeling hollowed out and utterly bereft. I waited 5 agonizing minutes after her car disappeared down the street, each second stretching into an eternity, before I cautiously slipped out of the house, my old pickup truck, an unassuming vessel of impending heartbreak, becoming a silent, unassuming shadow on the quiet suburban streets, its worn tires crunching softly on the asphalt as I maintained a safe, strategic distance, watching her car's taillights recede in the darkness, a sickly knot of dread tightening in my stomach with every passing block. She drove for approximately 20 minutes, following a route that led away from the brightly lit, familiar commercial centers and towards the shabbier, forgotten outskirts of town, the kind of place where dreams went to die and secrets were born, until finally, there it was. An undeniable beacon of my shattered reality. The Motel 6, its dilapidated, neon-flickering sign, a garish, mocking testament to my shattered dreams, each erratic blink a painful reminder of her deceit, its parking lot shrouded in dim, deceptive shadows, felt less like a place for transient stays and more like a clandestine haven for the darkest of secrets. The back, by a row of anonymous rooms, one of which had a faint, sickly yellow light spilling from a half-closed curtain, illuminating the number 7. My breath hitched in my throat, a sudden, sharp intake of air that felt like pure agony, because this was it, the undeniable, horrifying truth, my wife, in this motel, and that damning text, all converging into a singular, devastating moment of agonizing clarity. My breath caught in my throat, a sharp gasp that felt like a physical blow. As the stark reality of the situation crashed over me, this was undeniably real. My wife, the woman who shared my bed and my life, was here, in this squalid motel, acting on the command of that disturbing text message, and the weight of that truth was crushing. I instinctively grabbed my phone, not to call her, not to demand an explanation, but to record, to capture every damning detail, every whisper, every illicit sound, though my hands, betraying the turmoil raging within me, were shaking so violently that I almost dropped the wretched device, the very instrument of my burgeoning pain. Slipping out of my truck, I moved like a ghost, keeping to the deepest shadows, the crunch of the gravel under my feet sounding unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. With a terrifying blend of fear and desperate, insatiable curiosity closer to room 7, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frenzied drum solo of impending doom, truth. No matter how painful it might be, at first, the voices filtering through the thin motel wall were indistinct, a muffled murmur of unintelligible sounds that only heightened my desperate anticipation, as I pressed my ear against the cold, grimy concrete, straining to discern every word, my stomach churning with a mixture of dread and a sickening, morbid curiosity. Then, piercing through the auditory haze, I clearly heard Sarah's voice. Unmistakable in its timbre, though it was strangely modulated, laced with a hard, almost businesslike tone, I had never, in all our 15 years together, heard her employ, a chilling unfamiliarity that sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, confirming, with terrifying certainty, that this was indeed her. "Is that all you brought?" she demanded, her voice sharp, unforgiving, and laced with an unexpected edge that made my blood run cold. A shocking contrast to the sweet, gentle voice I knew. As a man's gruff reply followed, deep and unyielding, "It's what we agreed. You want more. You gotta earn it." My blood ran cold, solidifying in my veins, as the chilling implication of their exchange slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. This was unequivocally not a lover's quarrel, tryst, but a cold, calculated transaction, and my mind, reeling from the impact, raced frantically, desperately trying to piece together the horrifying fragments of conversation. Be selling. Was it herself? Was she entangled in some illicit criminal enterprise, the mere thought of which made me feel dizzy, as if a vast black void had suddenly opened beneath me? Then the man's voice echoed again, closer now to the flimsy wall, clearer, more defined, cutting through my daze with a chilling precision. "You got the product this time. Product." My heart hammered against my ribs with renewed ferocity, each beat a painful throb as I grappled with the terrifying unknown, desperate to understand what nefarious item they were discussing. Was it drugs? Something? Even more heinous, a dark secret far more sinister than I could possibly imagine. Sarah's voice, now subtly softer, almost cloyingly coquettish, a tone that made my skin crawl with an unbearable revulsion, confirmed my worst fears, while simultaneously twisting them into something far more grotesque, always. And I brought a little extra just for you. But it'll cost ya. A low, guttural chuckle from the man, a sound filled with unsettling satisfaction, followed her words, chilling me to the bone. Atta girl, you always know how to make a deal. The sounds that followed were disturbingly not what I had braced myself for, not the sounds of illicit passion, or even desperate clandestine sex, but something far more bizarre and, in its own grotesque way, utterly sickening. A distinct stomach-lurching squelch. My stomach instantly revolted, bile rising in my throat as a single horrifying question screamed through my mind. What the hell was going on in there? Then, a sudden, sharp metallic click echoed through the wall, followed by the unmistakable, cloying scent of something sweet, yet undeniably acrid, like a vile concoction of sugar and harsh chemicals, a smell that intensified the nausea churning within me. The man's voice, now closer still, almost a satisfied grunt, confirmed my growing dread. Yeah, that's the good stuff. Perfect for tonight's batch. My mind reeled, trying frantically to connect the disparate, horrifying dots gash product. Batch. Slowly, agonizingly, began to fall into place, and the full, horrifying yet undeniably mundane realization hit me with the force of a sledgehammer. Candy, not just any candy. Frankly, utterly disgusting than any graphic infidelity could have been, because I suddenly remembered a strange, almost cult-like obsession among some parents on a niche online forum that Sarah frequented, where they were consumed by the art of making artisanal, high-grade, often strangely flavored candy, some of which I now recalled with a fresh wave of nausea, even boasted of containing experimental unsettling ingredients. The product that had generated that sickening squelch and emitted that cloying sweet chemical smell was candy-making operation, a vile enterprise conducted in the dingy confines of a cheap motel room. The thought, so utterly bizarre in its specificity, so ridiculously mundane in its horror, was so jarring that for a fleeting moment I almost laughed, a hysterical, deranged sound that caught in my throat before the overwhelming wave of nausea returned with such force that I almost puked, the sheer unimaginable vulgarity of the truth assaulting my senses. I stumbled back from the wall, gagging, the grotesque reality of my discovery pressing down on me with suffocating weight. It wasn't the graphic sex I'd feared, a scenario I had grimly prepared myself for, but something far more grotesque in its crushing banality. My wife, Sarah, the architectural designer, the loving mother of our children, reduced to a clandestine, seedy vendor peddling homemade, possibly unsanitary, bizarre candy for cold, hard cash in a dingy motel room. The mistress text, I now understood with a horrifying clarity, was merely a crude inside joke, a transactional codename, an utterly pathetic attempt at wit between her and her anonymous contact, the mastermind behind their sordid little enterprise. My wife, the woman who had meticulously designed our beautiful life, was a clandestine candy dealer, engaging in something so utterly beneath her, so utterly beneath us. Disgust was overwhelming, a tide of revulsion that threatened to drown me, not just for the profound betrayal of trust that ripped through the very fabric of our marriage, but for the sheer squalor and the pathetic, grubby nature of her secret life, the sickening reality that my beautiful, elegant Sarah, who once commanded respect in professional circles, was now hawking dubious, likely unsanitary, sweets in a seedy motel for quick cash. It was a complete, utter violation of our life together, a profanation of our home, a shattering of our dignity in a way far more profound and insidious than simple infidelity could ever have been. Because this wasn't about love or lust, not about a passionate affair or a moment of weakness, but about cheap thrills and illicit paltry gains, a grubby, sordid transaction that was utterly, completely, and sickeningly revolting. I drove home in a daze, the phantom smell of burnt sugar and cheap motel air freshener clinging to my clothes like a shroud, a constant, vile reminder of the scene I had just witnessed, and when I arrived, Sarah was already asleep, curled in a fetal position, looking so innocent, so peaceful, a cruel caricature of the woman I thought I knew. I stood over her, looking down, and in that moment, stranger whose hands just hours ago had been elbow-deep in some grotesque, sugary concoction in a squalid motel room. The next morning, I woke before her, the dawn light filtering through the windows, feeling tainted, grotesque, as if the very air in the house was heavy with her deceit. And every shared object, every cherished memento, now screamed a silent, agonizing lie. I started my grim task in her wardrobe, systematically gathering every dress she'd worn on one of her clandestine errands. Every piece of clothing that might have touched that dingy motel room, or carried the sickening scent of that strange, illicit candy, and placed them methodically into large black garbage bags, each item a tangible piece of her deception. Her favorite perfume, the one she'd always generously applied before slipping out for her late nights, now reeked of hypocrisy, so I poured its expensive contents down the drain, watching the fragrant liquid swirl away, a symbolic washing away of her perfumed lies. Her expensive jewelry, carefully chosen gifts from me, pieces that once represented love and commitment, now felt cheap and tarnished, their sparkle extinguished by the cold light of betrayal. I carried the heavy bags out to the backyard, to the old blackened fire pit we typically reserved for joyous summer bonfires. A place of warmth and camaraderie now transformed into a crucible of sorrow and furious cleansing. My hands, though trembling with the magnitude of my actions, were driven by a cold, unyielding steel, a resolve hardened by her egregious deceit. I doused the piles of clothes in lighter fluid, the harsh chemical smell of the accelerant mixing sickeningly with the phantom sweetness that still clung stubbornly to my nose, a constant, repulsive reminder of her secret life. With a final trembling hand, I tossed in a lit match, and the flames leaped skyward with a voracious hunger, consuming the fabric, the memories, and the suffocating weight of her countless lies. Each flicker of fire a tiny, desperate victory, a purifying inferno meant to incinerate the pervasive rot that had infected our lives. Later that day, as Sarah was out on another errand, I presumed with a detached indifference, though I no longer cared enough to track her movements. The urge for surveillance having been replaced by an overwhelming desire for detachment, I methodically moved through the house, systematically purging her presence. Her art supplies, once a symbol of her creativity and a source of shared joy, now looked alien, her brushes lifeless, her canvases blank with unspoken truths. Her favorite ceramic mug, her side of the bed, the framed photographs of us smiling, so blissfully, devastatingly oblivious, each item, once imbued with love, was now a painful, mocking reminder of her elaborate deception. I bagged them, boxed them, anything that carried her scent, her overwhelming deceitful presence, her false history, and methodically removed them, understanding that while I couldn't burn every single reminder, especially for the sake of our innocent children, anything that directly tied to her, the betrayer, the grotesque candy peddler of room 7, had to be gone, utterly expunged from my sight and my life. The ultimate betrayal, I realized with a profound, aching clarity, wasn't merely the act itself, not the cold, transactional nature of her illicit business, but the horrifying, soul-crushing revelation of a complete stranger lurking beneath the familiar skin of the woman I had adored, a stranger capable of such calculated deceit and squalid secrets. The grotesque nature of her hidden enterprise, the sheer pathetic desperation of it all, was what truly broke me, shattering my perception of her into a million irreparable pieces. There was no grand passion, no tragic love affair, no compelling, romanticized narrative behind her infidelity. There was only a sordid, grubby, sickening little scheme, a pathetic attempt at illicit gain that defiled everything we had built. And now, I was burning every physical reminder of her betrayal, not primarily out of a vengeful fury, but out of a desperate, primal need to cleanse myself of the lingering stench of her lies, of the cloying, sugary, chemical-laden taste of her deceit that still clung to my senses like a poison. My future, once so clear, so meticulously planned, was now a frighteningly blank canvas, a vast empty space stretching before me. But for the very first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a faint flickering spark of hope ignite deep within me, a fragile but persistent ember. The fire was burning, consuming the last vestiges of a painful past, and with it, the suffocating weight of a betrayal I desperately needed to incinerate, to turn into ash, so that I might finally begin to breathe again.